Hi, my name is Bill Curtis, and I've had Parkinson's since 2000, so I've had it for about 17 years. And I wanted to tell you a little story about some things that I've done for my Parkinson's. When I was diagnosed, I was told that I would have about 10 good years, and then I could expect a lot more problems. And so I went till about 2012 before I really developed serious disability. At the time, I was off. If you have Parkinson's, you know what on and off is. I was off almost every hour of the day. I'd have maybe 1 or 2 good hours in a day. I had dystonia, I had dyskinesia, I had bradykinesia. I'd move very slowly. My gait was terrible, and I took very small steps. And I had some serious pain in my back. If I'd walk about 50 to 100 yards, I'd just be bent over with pain. And I also had very serious, I think, cognitive impairment. I couldn't tell you, when I was watching a television show, if an ad came on, I couldn't tell you what the TV show was. And I would go to a concert with my wife, and I'd say, well, we haven't seen James Taylor before, and she'd just look at me. And so I had several problems, and I was in an exercise program with sponsored by Michael J. Fox, and I didn't really notice that much difference in the exercise program. But I had been sent a paper by my father back in about 2006 that was on ketogenic diet, and it was by Ted Van Italy. And apparently people who were on this pretty awful sounding diet would improve their universal Parkinson's disease rating scale by an average of 43%. And I looked at that and I said, well, that's a very small study, and that's a very, very difficult diet, and I'm not going to do it. So, but I had this in the back of my mind that maybe ketones might have something to do with Parkinson's, and I thought if I fasted overnight, my glycogen, that's a stored form of sugar, would drop. And if I exercised, I might just make some ketones, and maybe the secret to making exercise work in Parkinson's was that you would do a kind of exercise that was ketogenic, that would make your body produce ketones. And ketones are a fuel that your body uses when you're fasting, and your brain can either run on glucose or ketones, but it can't run on fats, and it shouldn't run on amino acids. So it's a natural fuel for the brain. And I had, so I fasted overnight, and I went into the gym and I exercised, and I had been having serious problems with fatigue. And this fatigue, if I was, say, washing car windows, I just felt like I couldn't finish the job. And it's just very few windows. And the fatigue sort of magically went away. I remember a couple days after I started exercising this way, I was chopping roots out from a tree that had been pulled down, and I spent about 4 hours with an axe just going after it. So I went from not being able to finish washing the windows on the car to being able to work for 4 hours with an axe and other implements of destruction, digging bars and digging the roots out of this tree. And so it was quite amazing. And I wanted to confirm that it was the ketones, so I took some Gatorade drink that had a lot of sugar in it. And it totally ruined the effect. And my wife was talking to me, and she said, you know, you had this magic exercise. You went to the gym. What's wrong with you? I said, well, it's really neat. If you take sugar, it stops working. So I'm doing this experiment. And she said, okay, that experiment is over. Because it's really important to have your spouse be able to recognize you and know the person that you are and not the person that you become with Parkinson's. So, anyway, that was the first experience I had with ketogenesis. So, I went back and read the Van Italy paper, and there was a gentleman in there who had been referenced in several of the articles, and his name was Richard Veach. So I saw that he worked at NIH. I looked him up, and I wrote him in some emails and told him about this, and it sort of sparked his interest because he was working on ketones and exercise. And I wanted to see if this would work with other people with Parkinson's. So I had a friend that I knew who could do 1,000 sit-ups. And I had him try it, and no effect, because as Dr. Veach informed me, it's only the couch potatoes that this really works in. You make a lot more ketones if you're out of shape when you exercise. So, and also when I went to the people who I'd known from the exercise research at the Michael J. Fox study, they said, no, you should never tell anyone with Parkinson's to not eat breakfast and go exercise because of the fall problem. So I didn't really discover anything great. I just sort of helped myself with my fatigue. And then after exercising every day for a year, I became one of the in-shape people who it doesn't really work for anymore. So anyway. But fast forward about 2 or 3 years, and I was over at NIH and just happened to call my aunt who works there, and she wasn't there. And so I said, well, I know this other guy who works here, Dr. Veach. I'll call him and see if it's okay to drop by his lab and introduce myself. And he said, well, we can't help you. We're going to be shut down in 3 months. So I went over there and met him, and they were about to close down his lab. They didn't, but I got to know Dr. Veach, and one day Dr. Veach received an email from, who's the cancer guy? Seifried, yes, Dr. Seifried, and in it it said that you could raise your ketones in your blood to 2.5 millimolar, and this was by taking coffee that had 3 tablespoons of butter, 3 tablespoons of cream, and a tablespoon of coconut oil. So he says, why don't you try this and see if it works? And we had been talking about different things you could do with a material that Dr. Veach has that raises your ketones. It's a way of eating exogenous ketones. And we were trying to figure out how you could study it in a very short period of time, because it was, the safety studies were covered just a 5-day period of time, and I thought maybe with Parkinson's you could test it for fatigue. And so I was expecting to maybe see some little response in fatigue. And I wrote down all my symptoms, and I wrote down every hour of the day, and I was going to look back and say, in this hour, did I experience this symptom? And the very first day that I took the coffee with the butter and the cream and the coconut oil, every symptom that I had except for dyskinesia, that's these movements that come from actually having dopamine or dopamine receptor agonists. Every symptom that I had basically went away after about an hour, and say an hour or two after taking the coffee. And sometimes they would come back if I would eat potato chips or rice or something like that. But pretty much every symptom improved to the point that I wasn't feeling the dystonia. The pain went away, pretty amazing. And the only thing left was my dyskinesias. And I still had to take all my meds, but this was pretty amazing. I've never heard of anything like this. And I wanted to show my doctor, so I got all ready, took the coffee in the morning, and went over to my doctor, and I just fell apart in a late afternoon exam, and obviously she wasn't impressed. But then I was talking to my nutritionist, Miriam Kalamian, and she explained to me that if you eat too much protein, the protein turns into glucose, so it just kills the effect. So just like when I took sugar when I was exercising and it stopped working, when I take too much protein, it also stops working. So I learned about that. And I had had some salmon and some steak and some chicken at a buffet just before going up to see my neurologist. So it also falls apart when you're under stress. The fight and flight response sort of kills it, and falls apart a little bit when I do exercise that is anaerobic, because you make lactic acid, and then the next day you're clearing lactic acid and you're making glucose. So it's not perfect, but I've been able to do this now for a couple of years, and I've noticed over that time that I've gotten much better at mental tasks. And so then comes the question, what do you do about this? Do you tell other people with Parkinson's? I'm not a doctor, you know, and I don't know if it'll work in other people, but I have told people what happened to me, and obviously if they have Parkinson's, they're quite interested, and some people have tried it. And amazingly enough, all the people who try it sort of converge on the same protocol, which is to fast overnight, drink coffee in the morning with some kind of what are called MCT oils, medium chain triglycerides, and then to keep their eating in a 6-hour window and to avoid too much carbohydrates and to avoid too much protein. And that's a pretty simple diet to follow. It's not anything like the true ketogenic diet where 80% of your food is fat. It's just, it's a healthy diet. You can eat very good food. So a number of people tried this. So they all sort of converged on this same protocol. And people have told me that it's changed their lives, and other people have been able to have the same results. So if you're watching this and seeing me, I would say the same thing to you. I'm not going to recommend that you do this, but should you decide that you want to try it, I have some advice that you can find on a website called thefourthfoodgroup.com, so hopefully you can look at that and decide what you want to do. Now, I still take all the medications that I've ever taken, and that covers pretty much every type of Parkinson's drug. I take Sinemet, I take Comtan, I take Azilect, I take a Nupro patch, and I take amantadine. And I found that I could cut back a little bit on the Nupro patch. In other words, wear it maybe instead of 24 hours, wear it for 30 hours, and maybe skip a Comtan occasionally, and my dyskinesia got much improved. I do have something that I have access to that most people wouldn't have access to, and that's an exogenous ketone. And it's one that was designed by Dr. Veach, who I spoke about earlier. It should be widely available soon. There are some companies that are starting to make it, and the Oxford University has done a lot of work with this, and Dr. Clark over there has been instrumental in making a company that hopefully will market this soon. But it's a exogenous ketone, and I find that this helps when I have these times when I want to exercise and go anaerobic. It will prevent the lactic acid from accumulating, so it solved that problem for me. And it's useful when you're under stress or something like that to take, but I don't take it regularly because it's a little bit expensive, and I might take it if I were going to try to do something that was intellectually challenging as well. Well, the question is, what other things do I take? I take potassium, and the use for that is to prevent gout. There's an interesting story about gout. Gout is caused by a compound called uric acid. And they're doing studies now because uric acid is a common thing that's measured in blood. And they have a lot of data about clinical values of people who have had their blood tested and had their uric acid levels measured. And they measure this because uric acid leads to gout. It also leads to kidney stones. But in studying the epidemiological aspects of uric acid, they found that people who have high levels of uric acid don't develop Parkinson's as fast as people who have low levels of uric acid. And they also found that if you have high levels of uric acid, your progression will be slowed down. Now, uric acid does a couple of things. It is an antioxidant, and it is a chelator of iron. So both of those things could be working in Parkinson's, and the people doing the studies are quite good. But they have a study to see if they can take inosine and raise the levels of uric acid. There is a question about whether it's the ketone bodies that are causing the uric acid to go up, and that's why you're slowing down the progression or slowing the onset of Parkinson's, because when you take ketones, or when you are on a ketogenic program, I call what I do intermittent ketosis, your uric acid does go up quite a bit, and that's why I take the potassium, and that's what they recommend for the children with epilepsy, is taking a potassium. And if you look on the website, it'll say what kind of potassium to take, and have a few notes for what doctors should look for. But I take omega-3, vitamin D3, baby aspirin, glucosamine, multivitamin, and that's about it. I will say that there have been 2 studies with the ketogenic diet, and in one, the Universal Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale went up an average of 43%, and another one it went up, increased an average of 22%. It worked for some people, it didn't work for others. But if you take the people who had the highest initial Universal Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale, and a high number is worse. If you look at the 4 people who had the highest UP, Universal Parkinson's Disease Rating Scales going in, they improved by an average of 53%, and all of them improved. So I don't know of anything that can do that with these people who are really in bad shape. And this is like Awakenings. If you've seen the movie Awakenings, this is about that level of difference. And then there's also this possibility that it is, like the uric acid, neuroprotective and will be disease modifying. So there's that aspect that I think people should consider if they're thinking about this. And then I also say you should go to your doctor. I'm not qualified to do anything to treat anybody. You know, this is just me telling you what I've experienced. And when you go to your doctor, if you say something like, "Should I do this?" Well, your doctor's going to say no, because they're really using evidence-based medicine, and you can't call trials of 12 and 5 people and 1 case study evidence really yet. So what you do say to your doctor if you want to do it is, will this interfere with my treatment, or do you see anything harmful? And most doctors will say that they don't see anything harmful, and you can always refer them to some of the information that's published. If you go to the fourthfoodgroup.com, there will be some results of these small trials and some instructions to doctors on what kind of tests and things to look for so that you can safely do the diet.